Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, I'm going to be ranking all of the iconic feats in Final Fantasy XVI from worst to best. No, not those kind of feats. Iconic feats are guaranteed skills that Clive will have access to as long as that icon is equipped to Clive proper. Keep in mind you can equip 3 icons and their iconic feats, and then the other 6 skills you sprinkle in are based on whether you've mastered stuff or are part of said icon's initial kit. These iconic feats also tend to define the type of icon and the skills that they'll have, and that becomes really evident as you play the game and unlock more of them. So I want to talk about which ones are most useful and which ones are least useful, starting with the latter. So let's get started. My number 7 on this list, the iconic feat I think is the worst, is Blind Justice. This one belongs to Ramuh, and when activated, you go into a shot lock style menu. You can hover over the lock-on crosshair to lock onto enemies, and upon re-executing the skill, fire a shot at them. It attaches more like a lightning landmine to the opponent, which will explode and tether to other landmines and jolt to them whenever an enemy with one is hit. Now, the reason I have this at number 7 is that its uses are very few and far between. It takes a while to do all the lock-ons, especially if you're trying to use it on a single target. And if you're doing it on multiple targets, it can be nice for some crowd control, a little bit of extra damage to their will, but it just takes so much time to set up and it does so very little that it's really hard for me to recommend it to, well, anybody. Not to mention the actual control scheme of Blind Justice was a little strange to me. When I activated it for the first time, I expected to be able to move the lock-on reticle with my left analog stick, but instead that actually just moves Clive. Instead, I have to move my hand over to the right analog stick and aim with that, and I have to make sure I don't get hit in the process because that will actually cancel the entire thing. It's too slow, it's too clunky, and it's just not something that I would recommend unless you really, really like the sort of keep-away playstyle that it activates. I will say one funny thing, I might think it's the worst, but in terms of arcade mode, because of the weird balancing issues that there are, which I cover in a separate video, Blind Justice is actually the number 1 iconic feat if you're specifically looking to score. Because these orbs do so little whenever they are procced, they are great for adding points in arcade mode. Maybe that was on purpose, but honestly, you should go watch my arcade mode video because I have so many negative things to say about the scoring system in there. But at the very least, if you're looking to get really good score, you might want to bring it to arcade mode. Next up, we have number 6 in that of Wings of Light. This is Bahamut's iconic feat, and basically when activated, you can float around with Bahamut wings and gradually charge your Mega Flare gauge. Now, standing still actually causes the Mega Flare gauge to go up even faster, and by actually precision dodging an attack in this mode, you will instantly gain a full charge, and then you can gain charges all the way up to the maximum level of 4. Now, once reactivated, depending on how many levels of Mega Flare you obtained before activating it, it will just fire a non-stop barrage of lasers on everything in the immediate area. You'll even get a little ring around you to designate how many enemies or what enemies are actually close enough to you to get hit. Now, this one is also a little bit clunky and weird. You can't use most of Clive's other skills when you're actually in this mode. So anything you want to use, you're going to want to activate before you actually go into this mode, other than Satellite, which is actually kind of deliberately designed to be used while you're waiting this mode out. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. There are some pretty useful combos for this, and if you like the keep away playstyle, it does an insane amount of damage over time. Even if it takes a lot of setup, you can do just constant kind of crowd control on smaller enemies and big packs, or you can do a constant barrage of damage on an opponent. You can set it up for stagger, so a stagger is triggered right to do it. It has a lot of very powerful uses, which is why it gets placed at number 6 and above Blind Justice at number 7. But again, it is a patient game. Sometimes I just dodge by accident just floating around, so I highly recommend standing still and just trying to use the precision dodge. And even if you get hit, it doesn't actually start the meter all the way over. It actually just kind of decreases it and then it'll go down over time. So you can even bounce back and continue to charge it if you make a mistake and get hit. That being said, in the time it takes to charge, unless you can get the precision dodges down very quickly, it's just a lot of time commitment for something that you could probably do actively with the other iconic feats or just by using your regular skills. It's definitely a playstyle preference thing though, because like I said, it actually can be very strong. But compared to some of the other stuff on this list, I just had to put it at number 6 for the clunkiness of it all. Now, for my next 3 entries on the list, I actually think these are all preferential, and I've discussed this with quite a few people who tend to agree. This kind of range in the iconic feat ranking is going to depend on what you think is actually better for you, and less about what is objectively the more powerful option, because I think they're all pretty close in power, to be honest. That being said, I said I was going to rank them from what I thought was least useful to most useful, and as such, that's what my list is going to be based on for me personally. So my number 5 is actually kind of surprising to me, but it's Titan's iconic feat, Titanic Block. This just gives you a block button on circle. You can block normal attacks by just holding the button. Attacks will break through it if they're more powerful, but at the very least you have that. But if you precision block with it, and you can pretty much precision block everything, you can follow up with a Titanic counterattack which hits up to 3 times. It's a really good defensive option and is awesome for playing aggressive and just instantly catching an attack, bam, blocking it, continuing the assault, catch another attack, bam. You can just stand in an enemy's face, time your blocks over and over and over again, and you honestly feel awesome doing it. That being said, it's number 5 for a few reasons. 1, it is feel good, but not necessarily any sort of advantage over just normal dodging or even just regular parrying. In fact, there's arguments that it's actually worse than both of those things. While yes, you do get access to the Titanic counter, you are still very much in danger's way if you actually counterattack at the wrong time. Titanic Block doesn't outright stop the attack, it just blocks it so you don't take any damage. So if there's more attack frames coming from the enemy after that initial block and you go to counterattack, you'll actually still get hit and take damage. So you have to kind of block repeatedly in order to make it work, and that can get a little bit weird when you're constantly being moved around by some of the bigger enemies, or if they just have kind of wildly hard to predict patterns as an enemy, or even if they just have more attack frames. Some enemies just attack you and then immediately follow up with something that you really don't even have time to block. Of course, you could combine this with Will o' the Wisps to mitigate those times, but at that point, using the Titanic Block then just becomes kind of redundant in the first place. With parrying, at least you outright stop the attack, you freeze time, but it requires a little bit more skill. Precision dodging in this game is very, very easy. So you're choosing a defensive option, in my opinion, more for its style and less for its usefulness against those other options, and that's why I have it down at number 5, even if I think it is an awesome and fun skill to use. Then we have number 4, the Phoenix Shift, your first iconic feat in the game, and it is the one that allows Clive to dash at the enemy, whether they be in the air or on the ground. It is a very, very useful gap closer that you're going to struggle to want to take off of your bar to try other things. There's not really much else to say about it. It was basically put in the game to appeal to people who like something like Noctis's Warp Strike in Final Fantasy 15. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. I just find the next 3 options to be a little bit more useful or to have more of a direct impact. But man, when I took Phoenix Shift off my bar, I felt like I had lost something, you know, like I would do aerial combos with it a lot throughout the early game. You get a lot of great skills for it, and being able to follow up on an enemy that you've knocked into the air or Torgal has knocked up into the air, it's just such a special feeling that really gives you super action-y vibes. And I think a lot of people will keep Phoenix Shift on their bar, even if they are somewhat tempted with the other options on this list, or even if they just want to try something else out that's brand new. And I wouldn't blame you. It's super useful, and honestly, the only real negative I have to say about it is that you are not invincible while doing it. I think a lot of people, when they first picked up the demo, and even when they first pick up the game, see Clive kind of go into this invisible state and think that Clive is invincible during that time. But just remember, just because you're invincible doesn't mean that you can't see Clive, and that's true for the enemies as well. He is not invincible while doing the attack, even if you can't see him. So you can end up Phoenix shifting to think, oh, I'll just go through that, and it doesn't work. And I really hope that World of Warcraft joke kind of made sense, because otherwise this video is going to sound real dumb. But either way, that's the one major negative to it. You cannot use it in place of dodging, parrying, or Titanic blocking. Now we get into number 3, and this is definitely where you see my personal biases come in that of Cold Snap. This is Shiva's iconic feat, and it gives you an omnidirectional dodge for Clive. Now, if you time this dodge correctly, you can freeze an opponent, but if you time it perfectly, you will freeze them and all the enemies around you for a significantly longer period of time. Basically, if you just dodge it and you don't get the perfect one, it leaves behind this ice crystal that can hit enemies, and that ice crystal will freeze them for maybe a second or a second and a half. That's useful, but man, when you get those pixel perfect dodges and everything is just rendered completely helpless for like 6 or 7 seconds at a time, you just open them up to so many possibilities, and it works on pretty much, I don't think it works. I don't think it doesn't work on anything. I think it does work on absolutely every enemy in the game, even when you're like Clive fighting an icon or something like that. So the fact that it works on everything buys you so much time and is another dodge on top of the fact that you have your regular dodge. You know, I just think it's overall more useful. Realistically, the only downside that I could think of is that just because you've frozen an opponent doesn't mean you've stopped their attack. So if an enemy is frozen, but you know that the attack they're using has multiple follow-up attacks after, you might still need to be careful, or you could find yourself just beating on the enemy and then suddenly they come out of the freeze and they just instantly hit you, and you know, you probably don't want that. So please bear that in mind if you're deciding to use this skill, especially on bosses that do tons and tons of follow-up attacks. Then we get to number 2. This is one you get early, and it's one that's so hard to want to take off your bar. Deadly Embrace, Garuda's iconic feat. So this actually has a lot of applications to it. Number 1, if you use it on a smaller enemy, you can pull them towards you. This is great for extending air combos, great for separating enemies from packs, and just really fun to use. I mean, it's a grab. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? Its second use is that on larger enemies, you can actually use it to get into the air and extend air combos. Sometimes, if there's an enemy that just doesn't attack, that's just spam charges like on the ground, I'll just spam this over and over again to get into the air above them and then let them do their attack below me before I come down. It can be used as a dodge, a combo extender. It's just overall really useful on larger enemies, despite the fact that it won't pull them towards you. But number 3 is that it actually can pull larger enemies sort of towards you. When you get to a 50% stagger, called a partial stagger in the game, if you activate Deadly Embrace, they'll go into a little animation, be pulled to the ground, and enter an enhanced partial stagger state. While partially staggered, enemies take increased damage, they don't attack for a few seconds, and the whole animation of the partial stagger being dragged down by Deadly Embrace will actually buy you time for your cooldowns to come back, and that is by far one of the most valuable things that you can do in Final Fantasy 16, especially if you have abilities that you largely use to stay alive. So once you've used it and you get it so early and you get used to it, you just almost never want to be rid of it, because why would you not just want to have this entire extra attack window open with all these other utilities mixed in? It's just crazy good. I can't really think of a downside other than feeling like it just has to take up a spot like that. That is a downside, right? Feeling like, oh, there's no way I could give this up and try something else, because why would I ever? It's just really good. And number 1, really shouldn't surprise anyone, is Arm of Darkness. This is the Odin iconic feat, and it gives you access to one of the most powerful skills in the game, in that of Zantetsuken. Now, you don't start with the OP Zantetsuken. You actually have to use the Arm of Darkness in order to raise your Zantetsuken gauge. You can do this via just hitting on enemies with your basic attacks, nothing fancy. You can also actually perform a precision dodge and then a counter attack to get a little bit more gauge, but the big money is in counter attacking. If you land a successful parry and then counter attack after, you basically get 1 full gauge of Zantetsuken. Now, the sword is so long, it makes parrying much easier. So if you're also not very good at parrying, this now might be the time to give it a shot. The big thing for me is that this needs to be combined with the skills that Odin has in his tree, because the real strength of Arm of Darkness is that it gives you access to level 5 Zantetsuken. Yeah, you could use levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 for extensions, for aerial combos and stuff. We've seen that in trailers. You know, I'm sure you've seen it on YouTube or even done it in your own playthrough. But the big money is on the level 5 Zantetsuken, which freezes time, does a ton of damage, and makes you feel like you're playing Virgil for a little bit from Devil May Cry. I personally recommend Dancing Steel. If you've watched my best skills in Final Fantasy 16 video, I mentioned that that is a great skill. It's my number 7 on that list for a great many reasons, one of which is that it helps generate a ton of Zantetsuken gauge, especially when paired with my number 1 skill in that video, the Lightning Rod. One of my favorite stagger combos involves doing a double Arm of Darkness in order to get a double level 5 Zentetsuken. Go into a stagger with a level 5 Zentetsuken prep, set up the stagger damage, get the enemy to 1.5 times, lay down the lightning rod, pull off a Zentetsuken, immediately dancing steel to get enough gauge for a second Zentetsuken, do that, and you're talking about like almost 200,000 damage when you're playing in New Game Plus towards the later portions of the game. Even in the lower portions, when you're still doing regular New Game, there's almost nothing that's going to out damage this, and it requires a lot of skills and a lot of setup, but the payoff is so immensely worth it. I would be a fool not to put it at number 1 on this list. Now, I do want to give honorable mention to an iconic feat that is not technically an iconic feat, and that's the Limit Break. Yeah, technically, Ifrit is always equipped to Clive. It gets a few skills, and it has its own sort of tree with the center one, and it changes, and that's as close as you get to an iconic feat. And honestly, that would be my number 1 because it's the heckin' Limit Break. You've got animation cancels, you've got the damage amp from it, you've got the added will damage it does, the defense, the inability to die while it's active. It's like, of course, that would technically be the number 1, but I feel like it's kind of cheating because it's not technically classified as an iconic feat. So just wanted to give it the credit it's due, but you know, it's not number 1 on this list. And that's going to be a wrap for my video, my ranking on the iconic feats in Final Fantasy 16. Let me know about the 3, 4, and 5, because I'm willing to bet that if I ask almost any of you in the comments section, you would probably move those 3 around. Some of you might even move them up to Over Deadly Embrace, as useful as that can be. So let me know in the comments section of the video below. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for more videos on Final Fantasy 16. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one, and until then, take care.